So once again, thank you all very much for coming. I will now introduce our first speaker, who is Tom Kaye. Now, Tom is from the hallowed Isles of England, of Britain, and he is doing a master's right here in Oslo at the University in Viking and Medieval Studies. And today he's going to be presenting towards a pagan ontology. So Tom, please take it away.
Hello, everyone.
Oh, but please do stand here so that the chat could hear. Yes, perfect. Thank you.
So I've come to Boyle with a bit of a theory in regards to our subject, but we'll get this started. So I've got the rather, highfalutin title here towards a pagan ontology, but moving away from that, I'd like to start this all with a simple question. How can we possibly understand the pre-Christian past as moderns? Well, the past that we're looking at here is extremely different from our modern life worlds and concepts, theories, and ideas. It is so drastically different. And as such, how can we even begin to understand and perceive a lot of the sources that are available to us? And how can we even begin to go about constructing ideas such as religions or concepts or beliefs and the like? Indeed, this is especially the case with pre-Christian religion, because to the modern mind, it deals exclusively with things like morals, ideologies, and the like, and also appears often at times quite nonsensical, illogical, cryptic, or even horrific. And I'd like to, in essence, question how we can go about dealing with this. So in order to do this, I'm going to have a brief discussion of the terminology surrounding the subject as a point of entry to try and get you guys thinking about what influences the way we understand things and how we go about understanding things. Following this, I'm going to go over a typical solution proffered by historians of religion to this problem of understanding and the issue of terminology. And then I'm going to address why this is unsatisfactory and why new approaches are needed. And from this, I'm going to have a brief overview of the ontological term as the solution with a couple of examples just to give you guys an idea of what I'm talking about. So we turn towards the issue at hand and something that allows us to explore how we go about understanding the past, and that is terminology. And yet the difficulty in understanding this past is apparent even in our most basic terminology in reference to it, whereby the beliefs and practices of the Iron and Germanic Age peoples are just so, our understanding of it is defined by our categorisations of it. And the terms pre-Christian and religion, which are typically used within the scholarship to define this historical phenomena, come with considerable baggage and preconceptions that may affect our understanding of these past peoples. So we turn towards the first term that we use to refer to this past and understand it, and that is pre-Christian. This is used extensively in the academic field as a means of avoiding the pejorative associations of pagan or heathen, because these were often words used by Christians in reference to the beliefs that came beforehand, and as such often have some connotations of immorality and the like, though this is starting to change in the modern field. The problem with the concept of pre-Christian is it creates a teleological understanding of history. And for those in the room who don't know what teleological means, it in essence refers to an idea of history whereby everything logically kind of comes up to a single point in the now. So this, in the case of this, it implies that the pagans are always going to convert, they were always going to become Christian, and they were just waiting the transition to Christianity, which is not a very good way at looking at history. And also, this definition is necessarily negative. It is defined in opposition to Christianity, and as such will always be understood in relation to Christianity rather than as a valid and complicated system of beliefs and ideas in its own right. And it's also not that precise. When you say pre-Christian, that can be anything from the Viking Age right into the Bronze Age. That's nearly 1,000 years worth of history. That's an extended amount of time that we can refer to. So we need to, in essence, start to change up our ideas and terminology for this. So I think even the simple basic concept of how to go about labeling it makes things pretty complicated and affects the way we understand it. And now I'm going to be turning towards the second key point that allows us to kind of get to grips more with the question of how about we go about understanding this pre-Christian past, and that is religion. And this is where we get a significantly more baggage associated with it, because the idea that we have today of religions, with its associated moralities, holy books, dogma, churches, and all of this as a kind of discrete structure, would have been wholly alien to the average person living in the Iron Age and Viking Age Scandinavia. In the fact that you could even separate beliefs or concepts as something that can be labeled, even to them, would have been completely and wholly strange and bizarre. To them, it would have been simple everyday habits or practices. And a good example of this concept existing similarly is when, for instance, the English colonized India. That's when the concept of Hinduism as a discrete entity that can be labeled appeared for the first time. Whereas beforehand, it had simply just been practices which had existed for thousands of years and didn't need labeling into this discrete entity. It's only with the arrival of Judeo-Christian concepts in relevance to dogma that they felt the need to label it. And we are seeing a similar situation with the beliefs of the Iron and Viking Age, whereby this is not a discrete entity, and it is one where with considerable variation, and it would have been conceived of as not being a separate, discrete thing. And as such, I want to kind of ask the question, can we even describe this collection of ideas and concepts as being religion? It's something to question. And academics have recognized that our modern understanding of religion doesn't really map onto the past too well, and as such have gone about readdressing it or redefining it in order to address this problem. And the typical solution, as is presented here, is one that I'm taking from the Pre-Christian Religions of the North book, which is this gargantuan volume and about the most up-to-date scholarship on the concept surrounding it, and it's one of the key reasons why we use a lot of the terminology of pre-Christian today, at least within the field. And I'm going off Jens Peter Schjødt, who's a titan in the field, going off his definition, and he presents that religion is a worldview, very kind of similar to culture, and he separates this concept of the worldview by connecting it to the idea that it specifically has an other world, which is defined in opposition to our world, this world. And this, and in essence, this is what separates the religious kind of ideology and worldviews from the typical profane worldviews. And this is a concept which is used commonly in the scholarship. You see, for instance, John Lindow use it and Simon Nygaard. So it's one with a lot of currency. And if you remember my prior discussion about the concept of how we can separate religion, we see potentially an ability to separate religion founded off its otherworldliness. However, while they seem to address the problems that we have in approaching the phenomena surrounding what we would describe as religion within the pre-Christian past, this is not enough. When we test this model against the source space, it presents issues, namely on the fact that this very concept of an otherworld creates this idea of there being a supernatural versus natural, where you have a realm which is in opposition to our world, this world, the human world, whereby all these spirits and figures lie, which is indelibly separated and is simply the product of human imagination and human ideation and has no bearing in this world, whereas this world is the real, measurable, objectively observable world, which, while being very useful for modern perspective and our typical modern way of looking at the world, is wholly in opposition to the way that they would have, well, it's the way that the people of the Iron and Viking Age would have viewed the world. And as such, this creates misunderstandings and issues. And I'd like to present this as being ontological in nature, this misunderstanding created by such definitions. That is, our basest assumptions about the world in which we live and the way we categorize things. And I'd like to present that this categorization of religion that's quite common in the scholarship goes against the way they would have categorized the world around them. And as such, we have to overcome these dualistic ontologies in order to understand this distant past. So, why is this against the source space? Why am I saying that these dualistic ontologies do not work? Well, firstly, we have many examples within the source space of otherworldly beings existing in this world, being from it or simply traveling across it. Well, beings that we would describe as otherworldly. Obviously, from the perspective of the Viking Age, it may not have been so. So, for instance, we have Alpha, for instance, being described as residing within this world and potentially taking on the role of ancestors, so a bit of blurring the lines between human and spirit, and they are, in essence, they are what we describe as supernatural beings, and the world is replete with the Alpha. So what is the evidence for this? Well, I'd like to turn to Cormac's saga, where we have a short piece referring to a lone hill whereby the Alpha dwell within it. And this refers to the titular character having to go there to sacrifice to it in order to heal himself. And as we can see in this case, we have a being that we would describe as being otherworldly in spirit and, in essence, separated from the human world, dwelling in the very world in which we as humans dwell. And as such, you have to question the purely otherworldly nature if someone is able to go to the landscape and interact with these beings. Furthermore, it's not just the fact that they dwell within this landscape in terms of questioning their otherworldliness, but also the fact that humans often are presented as being related to Ulfar, either in the process of becoming them, as we have in Floteyabok, where King Olaf Guðröðursson is interned in a mound, and following his death is sacrificed to by the people. And we have a clear example of a human being able to become an Alpha and creating this kind of enmeshed, blurred lines concept of beings that we would consider to be otherworldly with the human this world as is defined by people like Schjødt. It was also a common practice within the skaldic corpus to refer to warriors as either murder elves or council elves, Morth elves or Roth elves. So we see this great blurring of the lines within the extant corpus that is available to us. Also, while it must be noted that a couple of my examples here have come from sagas, and that this is very debated within the scholarship in terms of sources, and I'm sure one of my colleagues will address this very debate about the relevance of sources and how one can go about drawing conclusions from them. But I'd like to put some points towards certain elements within this following a lot of the poetic corpus. So, for instance, the process described of the sacrifice to the Alpha is very similar to the sacrificial rites we see described in certain poems, potentially as within Haustlong, which my colleague Petter will let you guys know about. So and finally, before moving on from this concept of humans being fundamentally interwoven with what we would consider to be supernatural, we have a reference in Ynglingatal to humans being described as being natter, which are another creature that we would consider to be supernatural. Again, natter is used as a means to describe both creatures which are, what we would label as being otherworldly and humans. So we have to really question whether you can separate these creatures from this world in which we dwell that would be not understood from a typical modern ontological understanding. And to further support this questioning this separation, I'd like to point towards the blurring of the lines between humans and gods, which appears within the source space. So, for instance, we have Bragi the Old, who is commonly quoted as the first skald, and is where one of the first, or the earliest attestation of skaldic poetry that we have. In Grimnismal, he is described as being a god, and this kind of blurring the lines between historical figures and gods are notable. Furthermore, it's a common practice within the skaldic corpus to point towards the rulers being the descendants of gods, and this idea of rulers being linked with the divine and the holy, which again questions this very nature of, can we split this world and the other world from one another when we have people who are literally descended from what we otherworldly beings, if we can even say that they are otherworldly. For instance, in Velapla, stanza 19, which is a poem written by one of the court poets of Håkon Jarl, stringently pagan ruler who very much had an active court producing pieces surrounding this, where he is described as the war-seasoned generous descendant of Igor, which is one of the many Orthentaiti. And this is a clear example of people being descended, being the physical manifestations of beings that we would typically consider to be otherworldly, and as such, can we even separate them in the case that has been done with a Schjødt's definition? And note that this is a practice common across the Germanic cultural sphere, whereby in Linga Saga, we have Snorri Sturluson describing various kings as being descended from Yngvi Freyr, as well as within Bede, who describes the Mercian line of kings as being descended from Woden. And these are typically rejected as being euhemerizations, but I feel if we start to question the fundamental assumptions that we have caused by our own modern ontologies, we could potentially get closer to the source base and what's presented there. So to conclude on the religion as an otherworld ideology, we can see that this dualist understanding of religion, in which religion is characterized by this world, otherworld split, we can see that it's wholly inadequate to capture a complex historical reality as is presented to us within the sources. And from this, can we even ask, from this, I'd like to question what's taken. We even point towards the creatures that have come up in this so far as being even otherworldly, if they are so present in this world and interact with it so much, and even potentially come from it in some of the cases that we have, the blurring of the lines between humans and gods. Also, we can question, can we even separate a religion from the world if it's also so interlinked? So I'd like to present the solution to this problem, and that is what is variously termed the ontological term, as is presented by anthropologists who encountered similar issues when encountering their ethnographies, whereby the fundamental assumptions of them and their field, often done according to the dualistic lines that I've brought up, gets in the way of their understanding of the source bases and stops them from seeing key elements. And what this purports to do is take seriously the worldviews and ideologies of their ethnographies. And in our case, I'd like to present that we take seriously our source base, i.e. we give it logical primacy. We give it, in essence, the idea that it becomes the ground to which we test our assumptions and our ontologies against. And this brings me to my first turning, which is reflexivity is a concept which is common already within archaeology. We, for instance, have scholars like Neil Price who continuously test their assumptions and concepts against the ground of the source space in order to refigure them. And the ontological turn calls for the same thing to be done. And in essence, what we are doing is we are taking our assumptions about things like the existence of a thing that is religion and testing it against our source base and seeing whether this works or not. And what we have seen so far is in our taking our academic understanding of religion as it exists, I've taken it, tested it against the source base, and we've seen that it is not, it doesn't accord with it. And as such, we'll have to do something about this because the testing has shown it doesn't work. And this is where we come to the second key part of the ontological term, which is conceptualization or reconceptualization, whereby we take our ground, our source base, upon seeing that our assumptions that exist either on the personal level or within the field do not work, and we refigure them in light of this source base and come up with new concepts to explain and describe this complex historical reality. And in the process, be able to see things which we may not have been able to see beforehand. So I'd like to conclude on this and give some examples of a reconceptualization that may be possible. So, for instance, we have been talking about religion at this entire time, and we've shown that the concept of religion does not fit. So what if we completely ditch the concept of religion because we can't separate it from the society in which we see the sacral and the divine constantly kind of permeate the entire the entirety of society, in which there's things that we consider to be supernatural part of the everyday, and they would not have understood this understanding of separating religion as something from it. Or another example would be refiguring what we consider to be supernatural, questioning what the supernatural is, and even if there was a supernatural according to the those living in the Iron and Viking Age, and potentially refer to a paranormal understanding whereby things are considered to be part of this world and part of the world in which we dwell, but break conventions and ideas and norms in such a way that they become significant. And in essence, from this, I want to leave you with the idea of what are our basis assumptions and how can we reconfigure them? How can we rethink about things and our most fundamental assumptions when they fly in the face of our source base, and the realities presented to us within it? And thank you. And any questions?